There are amendments. Amendment 343, the clerk will read.
Strike everything after the enacting clause and insert the following. Insert new
Last
section.
line.
Correct the title.
The good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh, to move the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to move Amendment 343 for adoption.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 343 be adopted. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Complicated issue has to do with how the Climate Commitment Act, our cap-and-trade tax scheme, is applied to ag interests, farms and ranches around the state. As you know, Mr. Speaker, the ag interests were supposed to be exempted from the heavy tax burden created by the Climate Commitment Act. They have not been, at least not effectively. And I appreciate that what this bill is trying to do is mitigate the damage caused by the Climate Commitment Act on the ag industry and the Department of Ecology's incompetence in implementing the exemption that was supposed to be given to ag interests in this state. Now, the underlying bill and the underlying striker to the bill does take some steps to improve the disaster that the Department of Ecology has created in its bumbled implementation of the ag exemption. But I believe that my striker, this amendment, actually does the same thing more effectively. There are many elements of this complex strategy, Mr. Speaker. I'll point your attention to just a couple. One is the use of so-called special fuels, think in terms of propane and other things, and how they are used. The underlying bill allows for these special fuels to be exempted, as the existing law does, when they are propelling a vehicle. But many ag operators use these special fuels to warm their greenhouses. And that, at least according to the current setup, doesn't qualify for the exemption to the heavy tax burden created by the cap-and-trade tax scheme. So what this striker does, among other things, is it clears up that if you use those special fuels to warm a greenhouse, it does qualify for the exemption. There are other elements to it too, Mr. Speaker. Some of them have to do with the extension of existing timelines on exemptions. We want to put them out as far as they can get to give farm operators the greatest timeline for having the exemptions. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, I think this striker better allows smaller farmers and ranchers, smaller ag operators.
The member has 30 seconds.
Thanks. The smaller operators to access the exemption to the onerous taxes created by the cap-and-trade scheme. So all in all, I appreciate what the underlying proposal is doing. I think this striker does it better. And it has the support, by the way, of the State Farm Bureau. So I think that's a good indicator that it will help farmers around this state. Please vote yes.
Further remarks? The good member from the 19th District, Representative McEntire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a point that I think needs to be clarified is the bureaucrats that caused this mess, and it should be the bureaucrats that fix it. Please vote yes on this amendment.
The good member from the 19th District, Representative McEntire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ask a farmer what they fear more, climate change or Olympia. I doubt you will find any farmer that says that climate change is their biggest foe. That's not their biggest problem. It's legislation that comes forward like this, which makes it more difficult to be able to conduct farming in Washington State. The good gentleman from the 34th went down the list of some items of weather that have taken place, that have taken a toll on agriculture. Scientifically laughable to think that weather patterns in and of themselves isolated are connected in any way to legislation passed in this body or anything worldwide climate related. But even if we did acknowledge, let's just give him that one and say, okay, $700 million in crop losses because of a bad weather system or drought or something like that, it pales in comparison. The numbers don't even match up. It pales in comparison to the damages wrought because of the compounding of bad legislation that's come forward through here. That's what farmers fear. That's what makes farming impossible, is the bad legislation that comes forward and the false alarms of climate catastrophism, which misdirect policy all across the United States, including right here and including in this bill 1912. Please vote no on this bill, because the underlying premises are all messed up. The numbers don't align. There is no climate catastrophe. There have always been and always will be extreme weather events which are hard for us to deal with. But this bill, like all the other climate bills that we've done, do nothing. They don't bring down the temperature a degree. They don't bring down the sea levels an inch. They do nothing except for make it harder to do business and harder to farm in Washington State. Please vote no.
Further remarks. The good member from the 19th District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to redirect this conversation because we can talk in grandiose terms about climate change and climate warning. That's not what's going on with this proposal. This proposal is much narrower. This proposal is how do we fix the broken implementation of the cap-and-trade tax scheme. Now, it's trying to fix the system that the bureaucrats at the Department of Ecology have screwed up. And it's trying to move around a court decision that said that ecology doesn't have to implement the ag exemption that was baked in to the cap-and-trade tax scheme. So there's a lot, that's what makes it so complex. There's a lot to what's going on here, Mr. Speaker, but it's not about highfalutin notions of climate change. It's about simple problems of bureaucratic incompetence. Now, under the cap-and-trade tax schemes, farms are supposed to be exempted and excluded from the tax, and they haven't been. And what the bill is trying to do is put in place new mechanisms by which the bureaucrats can try to extend that tax break to the farmers. And I hope it works, Mr. Speaker, but given the track record so far of the bureaucrats who are trying to implement the program, I'm not optimistic. And you know, we've heard that they're working really hard. Well, Mr. Speaker, I wish the labor theory of value had any worth, but it doesn't. It doesn't matter how hard the bureaucrats at Ecology are working if they're screwing up the implementation of the tax credit. So, Mr. Speaker, I am, although it's tough to do it, I am advising a no vote on this bill. It means well. It may help a little bit. But, Mr. Speaker, ultimately, the only way we can fix the bureaucratic incompetence of implementing the tax and the cap-and-trade tax scheme
the
is to
member
repeal.
has 30 seconds left.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Is to repeal the cap-and-trade tax scheme because we can't implement it the way it was designed to be implemented. So please vote no.